Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this is something of a red letter day for animal welfare, but it does have to be said that for 10 years until now, there has been a stony silence in this House about animal cruelty. For 10 years, the major parties in Parliament have ignored the pleas and petitions of hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders to put an end to the worst cases of animal abuse, namely sow crates and battery hen cages. For 10 years, when I have raised issues of animal cruelty in this House, MPs have cracked jokes and rolled their eyes and have not seemed able to take the issue seriously. So it is great to sit here and listen to MPs speaking thoughtfully about animal welfare, particularly the last speaker, and I congratulate Simon Bridges and David Carter for bringing this bill to the House. The Green Party supports the bill, in particular the introduction of the reckless ill-treatment charge, which is new, and other provisions which will hopefully make it easier for the SPCA and MAF inspectors to take prosecutions for animal abuse. And we will be making amendments in the Select Committee to strengthen some of the other provisions in this bill. But I have to say at the outset that we're deeply disappointed that this bill is so narrow in its scope and addresses only a tiny proportion of the cases of animal abuse in New Zealand. We're disappointed too that the bill does nothing to amend the loopholes in the Act, which allow hundreds of thousands of animals to suffer on a daily basis in sow crates and battery hens, for example. Simon Bridges said this bill will improve the law across the board. Sadly, it does not. It deals only with individual acts of cruelty against animals, and it turns a blind eye to institutional cruelty against animals, which comprises the overwhelming majority of cases of animal cruelty in New Zealand. We cannot, in good conscience as a Parliament, get tough on individual acts of cruelty to animals while ignoring even more serious cases of institutional abuse. Now, the Minister and Simon Bridges have read out examples of individual cases of abuse, and they've said New Zealanders are increasingly shocked by these cases of individual cruelty to animals, and that is true. But New Zealanders are even more shocked, or were even more shocked, by Mike King's expose of the conditions of pigs in New Zealand. But what has happened? Nothing has happened. The pig code that was promised last year still has not materialised. So let us put this into perspective. As animal welfare lawyer Peter Sankov observed wryly in a recent blog, politicians only hate some kinds of animal cruelty and are perfectly happy to promote other types. So it is vital, if we're not to be accused of hypocrisy, that we demonstrate that this Parliament cares about all forms of animal cruelty, not just some, by widening the bill and ensuring that tougher sentences apply to all people who abuse animals and not just some. We support the increase in penalties for ill treatment because this is one of the most common types of offence, but we also, like the Labour members, want to make clear that increasing the maximum length of a sentence, say from 3 to 5 years, will not reduce the incidence of animal abuse in New Zealand. The reality is, it's been pointed out, people found guilty of animal cruelty are very, very rarely jailed in New Zealand, only 10, even though the legislation already permits 3-year jail sentences. In fact, 10 years ago, Parliament increased the sentences from 3 months to 3 years, but sentences for animal abuse have not gone up. Not long ago, a farmer, Mark Spitz, ignored repeated warnings from MAF and slowly starved a number of his cattle to death, yet he received only 250 hours of community service and a fine, and this is typical. Quoting Peter Sankov again, he says, raising sentences is the easiest thing that Parliament can do, and sadly it's a reflex action designed to distract us from the real problems of animal cruelty. It makes for nice yelling though, let's raise penalties, let's send those bastards to jail. So if this Parliament is committed to reducing animal abuse, we must look at wider issues, and one of them has been touched on, and that is, why are there so few inspectors investigating incidents of animal cruelty? Why are there so few prosecutions? And why is the funding for animal welfare and prosecutions so pitiful in New Zealand? The truth is that there is very little point in increasing the penalties for animal cruelty crimes if the enforcement authorities are so under-resourced that few prosecutions are ever made. This is the reality, this is the truth. This bill will raise the expectations, as previous speakers have said, and unless there is a huge increase in resources and funding and more inspectors, it will be, as Jim Anderton suggested, window dressing. We also need to address the issue, why doesn't the government enforce the Animal Welfare Act properly? Why do we only have 5 full-time MAF inspectors, even though there are more than 100 million animals in New Zealand? And why does MAF prosecute only 1.85% of the complaints it receives? Why has the government effectively abdicated its duty to monitor animal welfare to inspectors from a charitable organisation, the SPCA, 60% of whose inspectors are volunteers, many of whom work part-time, and whose work is seriously hampered by the fact they do not even have full police powers of prosecution? Why doesn't the government properly fund prosecutions of animal welfare instead of relying on the public to donate to the SPCA? Why doesn't it fund the SPCA properly? And why it has basically abdicated all its work to the SPCA, which is so cash-strapped that it doesn't carry out any random inspections, and it can't afford to undertake prosecutions that would be expensive. The Farmers Weekly pointed out a few years ago that the animal welfare team in MAF, he said, it's emaciated. It said, this is Greg Reid in 2008, the reality is at the moment we are so thin on the ground and we're running from bushfire to bushfire. A lot of the public, they only see what's on the surface. What actually it is quite chaotic. So in other words, the government-funded welfare inspectorate budget is so pitiful that it is delegating this work to a charity that does not get funding. So unless we deal with this issue, then it will be simply window dressing. Unfortunately, the bill doesn't directly deal with anything to improve the inadequate system of monitoring and enforcement, but we will seek to amend this in select committee. The reality is that people, and indeed probably judges, perceive animal welfare offences as a different kind of crime from other crimes, so we would like to see guidelines added to the Act which would help judges to decide on the seriousness of an offence, therefore the appropriate length of a sentence. We're pleased with the clause that provides an offender can have their animals removed and not just the ones that were ill-treated, and a few other aspects of the bill. But we think it's critical that we strengthen provisions relating to the abuse of farm animals, not just companion animals. Most prosecutions against farm animals are taken under sections 12, 13 and 14 of the Act, not section 28. So we would like to see a similar strengthening of provisions around section 12 of the Act. The Minister has said, finally, that all acts of cruelty are unacceptable to this Parliament. This is music to my ears. Many speakers here have made similar comments, and I therefore look forward to the fact that we will have, that the Minister will finally act on issues such as banning of sow crates and battery hen cages, because if he does not, the public will see this as a complete double standard, that we get tough on some aspects of animal cruelty while ignoring others. Finally, the Minister said, the former Minister Jim Anderton, he said, our Animal Welfare Act is renowned as progressive, by our trading partners, well, I can assure you that it is not renowned as progressive by most